Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ion Canon podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld podcast network for in-depth discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Joel, and if it sounds like I'm repeating myself, it's because we had a bit of a discussion off air by accident when I realized I didn't click the go live button. Thank goodness I noticed before it was too late. How embarrassing. How embarrassing. Uh, don't worry, everybody. The show will go on. Matthew is, of course, not returned from New York Comic Con just yet. Well, I actually think he might be here. He's just packing up. Um, go check out his videos. They're on the channel. He has given us such a great in-depth look at what happened during this Comic Con, and we will have a full breakdown hopefully next week. But don't worry. Like I said, we have a discussion for you. We're going back all the way to the days of Legends, and I brought my friend Redleader until he's here to help us along the way. Welcome, Redleader, again to the story. Womp womp.
Hello again.
Hello, I am so sorry. I feel a bit embarrassed. That's what happens when I don't have a co-host to deal with the tech stuff.
Yeah, we've had worse tech problems.
That's true. Trust me, I remember the days of me and Red are old. So me and Red are all old buddies. So we had like Skype issues up the wazoo. It's like, ugh.
Skype is not reliable.
No, that's why I love StreamYard. By the way, this is like one of the better podcast kind of things here going on. Thank goodness I realized before it's too late. Otherwise, I would have been a whoopsie daisy. As always, of course, fellas, you can follow us at the Ion Canon Pod. Follow us the Ion Canon Pod. Of course, follow us at the Star Wars Underworld Discord, where we talk all sorts of fun stuff, and we have game nights and movie nights. Like I said, you can, of course, check out the other videos on the Star Wars Underworld Discord, where my buddy Matthew, who's in the comments, yes, I know, Matthew, I've gone live. Yep, he's unpacking as we speak, has given us a full breakdown of the con. And this Thursday, it's Tractor Beam, and as I said off air, I didn't know, Matthew, what comics you're going to be doing for Tractor Beam this week. If you want to put in the comments and I can put them on screen later, that'd be great. To kind of continue / go back to the week of Star Wars here. We'll make it a bit quick. I was just talking about how I have like a very in-universe way of thinking about things, and I like to look at certain stories, and I kind of have an appreciation for like how they affected things later on, either intentionally or not. Before we finished, me and Red were talking about Mortis, for example, and like, yeah, Lucas. We don't know if Lucas ever intended to go back to Mortis in any real way after that arc. But it's going to be interesting, months later, if we can go back to Morris. Like, will my appreciation for that arc, which I haven't seen in a long time, so I really have not thought about it, will that go up or go down depending on like what built upon? And then with like Saw Gerrera, well, that's a bit more of an interesting one because Lucas did have some plans for Saw, but not really. Well, I mean, for Underworld, but you don't know how deep it went. And obviously Saw the character, he appeared in an arc, which I thought was fine. But my appreciation for that arc has gone up because of Saw's ultimate trajectory as a character. Red, if you want to repeat anything that you said off air.
Thinking about canon stuff, it's...
You can think Legends too if you want to kind of add that, because I think we're talking about a book that I think does have some effects.
True. But what's interesting with the canon stuff is so far everything has more or less been tie-ins in terms of stuff that's been released as canon, like intentionally post Clone Wars, post George, and so we don't have the kind of stuff like what we'll be talking about later that sort of goes more out there and is just a story on its own that sort of lays a foundation for something. It's more like the EU is like working backwards from a foundation that it needs to lay before a thing is released. But we'll definitely see. I mean, who knows what stuff we've had so far that was just not padding, but like additional stuff for those setup stories that's going to become down the line major important things. I mean, Aphra definitely was just sort of a dark version of Luke, because the Vader comic was just a parallel to the Star Wars comic. So we had evil 3PO and evil Chewbacca. And look at how Aphra's come out of that. Like, well, we're definitely going to start getting more of that stuff. Not more stuff coming out, but more stuff from earlier in canon becoming, I think, more explored as they're able to do, different stories, as they're able to be a little bit more experimental, not as much promotion for a different product.
Yeah, that's sort of the fun thing of I guess of Star Wars Forever, in a sense, because now you can kind of, on the same sense, I'm always say, if you want to end something, end it. Tell a good beginning, middle, end. Not everything has to tie in or be like this continuous thing forever. But you look at something like the Clone Wars in that time frame and the context in which it was made. It's like Clone Wars stuff only really affected Clone Wars stuff. When they did the Mando stories, that only really affected Clone Wars. They didn't think, oh yeah, we're gonna have this like big epic book, Mando story that's gonna stretch on for the entire post pre original trilogy era. Like Maul, I always kind of suspected had Clone Wars finished, Maul probably would have died in the Clone Wars and kind of kept to that little epoch. Again, like Mortis. So yeah, you're right. Afra has sort of evolved, at least in the comics, as sort of this her own thing. And I hope one day she gets her own show or something, like, because she'd be great. I think I'm waiting for that leap to happen. But yeah, it is interesting, kind of looking at that and kind of looking at things that may not have ever intended to be foundation for things in the future. And we're going to definitely talk about that with this comic that we're hopefully going to talk about. But that's the week of Star Wars. A little bit of news. We're not going to go into everything at New York Comic Con. Actually, we're not going to go into anything because I want to save that for next week when Matthew's here. But Red, for you and for this episode, I do have some news. The Essential Legends collection, thankfully, is continuing with the audiobooks. The Essential Legends collection, of course, is reprints of various Legends books. And the new list of Star Wars Legends books that they have announced that are going to get audiobooks are as follows: Outbound Flight by Mark Thompson, Dark Rendezvous, again by Mark Thompson, who will be reading it, I, Jedi by Jonathan Davis, The Courtship of Princess Leia by January Lavoie, who's going to be reading it, and Survivor's Quest by Mark Thompson. Red, I'm going to toss it to you. Have you been reading any? Do you like to listen to audiobooks, and have you gotten any of the unabridged ones for any of the previous Essential Legends collections?
I've not listened to the audiobooks, but I kind of want to get Dark Rendezvous because that's my favorite Legend story, and it's Mark Thompson reading it, and I have heard most of the Revenge of the Sith novelization. He's amazing, and he did Plagueis as well, right?
No, he didn't. I don't remember his name, but I know the guy who read Plagueis is the guy who played the butler on The Nanny. And Moriarty in Star Trek.
But yeah, Mark Thompson is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be great getting to hear him. I guess do well. He's done like Dooku's voice before and everything that works. It will be also just nice to have Courtship get an audiobook because Courtship had one back in the day, right? But it was one of the, if it did, it would have been one of the very truncated ones.
Yeah, a lot of the with the exception of the Thrawn trilogy, a lot of the 90s stuff apparently has abridged audiobook. So yeah, they're, I don't know how good they are or not. I know Dennis Lawson, funnily enough, read some audiobooks in his day too.
Yeah, I think he did this. I think he did Dark Force Rising.
Oh, that was cool. But yeah, they're not unabridged, unfortunately. So I like the fact that the X-Wing books have gotten unabridged audiobooks. For anyone like me, because I especially love reading audiobooks. I think the one I'm kind of interested in is Outbound Flight. Because of, I know we're not supposed to talk about this much, but I'll mention because of Ahsoka and kind of the Outbound Flight influences of that show. And also that book kind of still works in current canon, more or less. Kind of an official prequel to the Thrawn Alliance's books, Thrawn Ascendancy books. So, also Courtship, I agree. That one is good. Yeah, your Dark Rendezvous. I know that's another one. I know that's another big your favorite because of Scout and kind of its philosophy on the Force, which I know you're a big fan of.
Now I can just clip. Now instead of having to transcribe that entire chapter where Yoda explains the actual nature of the dark side and light side and the Jedi and why people are wrong about it, because I have literally had the book in my hand and had to transcribe that into text to make an argument once,
well, damn.
and it's like now I can just get the audiobook and just clip that.
Woohoo!
To make that argument. And it can be Mark Thompson reading.
Hey, well, if you do that, you gotta give me a copy so I can use it. Because I know that guy. Did Matthew Stover write Dark Rendezvous?
It's Sean Stewart.
Okay.
Stover's Shatterpoint. Those are my two favorite novels.
Oh, that's Shatterpoint's good, yeah. So yeah. I mean, you gotta send me that one because I think you probably will agree with that as well. So yeah, I'll be very curious to see what the next round of Essential Legends, both audiobooks and books, are gonna be. Especially if they have for two New Jedi Order, because like those are impossible to find these days. Like, do you do a night? Do they want to do unabridged versions for a 19-book series? Sign away your life, Mark Thompson, or maybe they'll get other people to do every book.
I am curious if they're gonna do the shorter books, the kids ones, like Young Jedi Knights and Junior Jedi Knights at any point.
Oh, those would be fun. Yeah, those are some classics. Especially because like there's like a I don't know if like how much of the conspiracy theorist in me is like pulling me to say like, are they trying to tie this stuff in with like the current stuff to kind of like you're kind of the influence in a weird way, like we got Outbound Flight and Survivor's Quest, which are Thrawnish. Thrawn obviously big deal right now. If the Rey movie happens, New Jedi Orders, like, are they gonna give us Young Jedi Knights books? Cause like that's kind of the influence there. Like, hey, this is what Luke was doing. So that would be fun. They've done. I'm really glad they did the X-Wing books too, because I know those didn't have unabridged audiobooks, even though Plagueis and both Plagueis and the Heir of the Empire have already got their audiobooks and they're unabridged. So yeah, this is exciting news. I'm very happy that this is definitely this is a thing. Oh, and by the way, our buddy Matthew got to meet Mark Thompson at New York Comic Con. He's always around.
Ooh.
So yeah, exciting. So I'm glad. Is there any particular book that you hope they do a new Essential Legends audiobook or book for? Any like one in particular read you're pining for?
Dark Rendezvous was the one I was hoping for, so I'm glad that's gotten one. Did they do Splinter of the Mind's Eye yet?
No, I don't think so, unfortunately. That would be one I think that would certainly be interesting, because I know you were talking about that during our off-screen conversation. Whoops, me. As sort of one of the more interesting books to read, and I've never read it, but I've always heard interesting things, especially how Luke feels about Leia, which doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, it would be, because that comes out in what, 78. So
Yeah.
there definitely wasn't an audiobook back in the time it was released. So that would be a good one to actually get an audiobook for.
Yeah, now you get to see what pre-Empire Strikes Back Star Wars was like, so that would be fun. But yeah,
I'm a Star Wars purist. I only believe in the original Alan Dean Foster, George Lucas universe.
The true canon. Yeah. But yeah, I'm excited and I'm glad this is continuing. You're welcome, Ken. We're hoping to keep this show going because we get to talk about books and stuff, which is fun. Okay, that we did all the news stuff. Now we can get to the actual meat of bones of the show. That's right, everybody. We're doing a Legends look back, and we're going to be doing Tales of the Jedi, Golden Age, and Fall of the Sith Empire. Dun dun dun. All right, so I guess let's just restart. Talk about just our overall thoughts on just this series and whatnot, and I'll go first. Tale of the Jedi is part of that era of Star Wars book, which I mean, if we talk about pre-Empire Strikes Back books, which I do enjoy, but another era of Star Wars book I always find fascinating are '90s Star Wars books because there's just something fascinating about looking at people building off the Star Wars universe without the prequels, before the prequels, that before times era. Um, and that is really just always a fascinating look at like what people thought about just the world and the universe. And to go back to the weekend Star Wars discussion that we had at the beginning, this book, while it's sort of fascinating because I had a very in-universe look at this book, thanks to the Old Republic MMO game timeline videos, which were great, by the way. If you ever have a chance to look at those, they're on YouTube still. Go look at them; they're great. To kind of these books are so foundational to so much of what the EU would be, at least the ancient EU would be. And by ancient, I mean like pre the Phantom Menace stuff going forward. But what's funny for me is I never realized until I like really did study kind of more the out of universe discussion. I mean, the out of universe behind the scenes stuff of, Tales of the Jedi was like its own thing that just other authors in the video game people just built upon as time moved on, with Knights of the Old Republic building upon Tales, and then Old Republic video game being essentially the sequel to Tales of the Jedi with the vitiate stuff, especially what we're about to discuss. So, Tales of Jedi has always been fascinating to me, kind of both from that plane of foundational to the EU of Legends up really until 2013, and just that kind of 90s weird Star Wars pre the prequel. We don't really know what the Sith are, so we're kind of making it up. Palpatine and Vader. Well, Vader's the Sith. Palpatine, we're not quite sure of just yet. So yeah, that was always really interesting. But Red, what's your relationship to the Tales of the Jedi series?
Yeah, so Tales of the Jedi had always interested me because that old source book that has Vader on it? That's like the ultimate Star Wars guide.
Oh, I think so. Yes, I think so. Like I remember, was that like before Episode 3?
It's like right when I think it was released a few months before Episode 3 because Ian McDermott does the intro.
Okay, I think so. I had a lot of those essential guides, so they all kind of mixed in my head. But yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I got that. I would have been like 5 or 6, and that was my intro to pretty much all the Legends. And I remember, those images it would have because it had all of the continuity kind of treated as one thing. So like, I find out, that's how Chewie dies, and they have the panel from the of Chewie getting blown up by a moon, and all that stuff. And they had a lot of stuff from Tales of the Jedi. And so that was kind of always with me as a kid, just these sort of vague ideas of, there was this great hyperspace war. And, that one shot of everyone looking up as the Sith fleet arrives above Coruscant is etched in my memory from before I even watched Episode 3, because I that was the panel they used in that book. And so Tales of the Jedi was always sort of mysterious to me because I couldn't get my hands on the actual issues. And I wasn't even that big of a comic fan at the time, but the events of it and its sort of ripple effects always were there as a foundation for Star Wars and for Legends growing up.
Is this the one, by the way?
Yep.
There we go.
Great shot.
Like bought my comic. Yeah, I mean it's a good shot. But no, I completely get that. If that's the one I think it is, I have a weird history with that book. Just a small little tangent. That's where I think I discovered Dark Empire, and I find the story both funny and kind of shameful at the same time because of what happened. Where I got obsessed when I found out Palpatine came back in like a spirit. And the reason why that clicked with me so hard because at the time, I was a big Harry Potter fan. I know. Hang on. So it reminded me, in book 4 had already come out, so it's like, oh, Palpatine just pulled a Voldemort, and he had his own little Horcrux. So, but no, I totally get that, and I remember all those essential Legends guides. But keep going, Red. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it. So that stuff always interested me. It had definitely, I think, more about the Golden Age of the Sith stuff than it did about Ulick and everything. But that was the stuff that started interesting me when I really got back into Star Wars around 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back and I got the single issues for for the first Tales of the Jedi, Knights of the Old Republic arc, and Freedom Net Uprising and that stuff, and just absolutely loved it. And only ever got my hands on the trade paperback for Fall of the Sith Empire, the old trade, and read that. And it is confusing without reading the first part. But so for this, I got on digital the Golden Age of the Sith. But yeah, this stuff, it's sort of only hinted at in the larger canon up to that point, or around that point, by well, yeah, we had seen Naga Sadow's ghost in the comics. Had he been mentioned in Jedi Academy?
No, you're thinking of Mark Arachnos, and that's Jedi Academy.
Is Mark Arachnos? I mean the books. Not,
the book. No, you're thinking of Exar Kun. Exar Kun was in.
Well, yeah, Exar becomes a Sith because Naga Sadow's ghost is in the Massassi Temple.
I don't think that was established just yet. I think that's a lot later.
Okay, yeah.
The ghost stuff comes from the time. Yeah, the ghost stuff I think comes from the timeline stuff in Old Republic.
Now we see in the comics that Tom Veitch writes, we do get Exar going to the temple because he gets marked on his forehead, the same mark that Naga Sadow has in this.
Right. Although I think I want this is Dark Lords. We're talking about Dark Lords. We're kind of have to talk about all of them to some extent. I think it's implied though that spirit who does the Exar Kun and is supposed to be Mark Arachnos because it's got the same looking headpiece. If you ever read the book, it's very interesting because I actually have read. Because that's actually one of my favorites. Because I listened to the audiobook where Exar Kun is sort of guided by the Force ghost of Frida Nad to go to Yavin, and then he actually never meets Naga Sadow. Naga Sadow is only in this book. The ghost I think you're thinking of are Frida Nad, and then probably Mark Arachnos.
It might have been Frida Nad then, yeah. Because I remember that he goes there and he's like, I'm not going to fall to the dark side. And the Sith ghost is like, what do you mean fall? Dude, you are not a Jedi. You've been a Sith this whole time.
Yeah, that was Frida Nad. But yeah, you're right. It is one of those interesting stories like these are again like interesting because I think you and I read because of how we kind of came into Star Wars, and we always had the essential guides and the big chronological book, which I always love those because they do kind of take all the story material and kind of lay it out as like one big thing. We kind of read this and it's like, we kind of read it first as sort of like this is just a small part of this bigger history, and then we read the book and it's like, well, they're not really. This thing is like not setting up Revan or anything like that. It's just sort of like, here's tell a story 5,000 years before A New Hope. The kind of the juxtaposition. It's still good, by the way. Just the juxtaposition for that. I don't know if you had that or not, but
yeah, this really was the point where they kind of got to experiment, because. I mean, Tales of the Jedi writ large was a lot of experimentation, but Veitch, when it came to his stuff, sort of had to take what Kevin J. Anderson had done and not to be too harsh, but make it good. Which even Anderson admitted later, after the comics came out, that he wishes that someone had stopped him and the comics had come out first, because Exar Kun would have been so much better if he had based it on how he was handled, and like everything about Nomi and whatnot that Vijay set up, because it is sort of weakly handled in the Jedi Academy books. And so Tales sort of tells its own story, really, just with that setup. And this gives Kevin J. Anderson the chance to really experiment without like telling the story of how things got there. The only real bit of setup is Odaner and the Masasi temples.
Right. Yeah, I remember. So that's interesting. I thought Tales of the Jedi was around closer to Jedi Academy, so I didn't know Jedi Academy came out first, and then Tom Weitz was like, "Here, do the prequel." So kind of to that, it's like, "Here, we did some stuff with some ancient Cisco's. You can tell the story of those guys." So that's interesting. But yeah, again, Tales of the Jedi is just it's so fascinating, and I love. If Tim's on and Heir of the Empire, I say is the foundation for. I mean, Jedi Academy is too, but I think in some ways, kind of the Tim's on Heir of the Empire stuff is kind of more the more solider foundation for like the tone of what the post Endor era would become. Tales is very much, and in some ways, Jedi Academy 2 is more the foundation for what Old Republic, kind of up to Plagueis, if you really think about it, would become as well. And I just think it's neat. But let's go into this book in particular, the actual Golden Age, to Fall of the Sith Empire. Which Red, you have the digital. I'm using the old Dark Horse Omnibus, which has Golden Age, Fall of the Sith Empire, and the first official Tales of the Jedi story, ironically called Knights of the Old Republic. So it gets a little confusing, but not too much. So this is interesting because Golden Age and Fall of the Sith Empire, they aren't the first ones. They actually did not write this in order. This is a prequel sequel. One of many prequel sequels that Star Wars loves to do. With like things like High Republic Phase 2 and whatnot. So this is sort of interesting. What is interesting about it is I actually have read a little bit more of the later, and by later I mean kind of the out of universe, the in universe later story, which is the out of universe early story. And it's interesting to see kind of what kind of I don't want to say they get right and wrong, that doesn't sound right, but more like how those early stories kind of write the early Sith Empire and whatnot, and then what we actually get. Which I actually find interesting because, I mean, in some ways I think it works. I think there might be a few discrepancies here and there, but what can you do? Sometimes that it happens. It happens. But I'll throw it to you, Red. How well do you think? Hey, what's your thoughts on just overall thoughts on these two arcs, for lack of a better term, and how do you think they kind of fit with the rest of the Tales of the Jedi narrative of what at least you can remember?
I think Golden Age is definitely the stronger of the two parts. I think it gives itself way more time, and it is more focused on the political machinations and sort of exploring what the Sith Empire is. And you get some nice just general dark side stuff and set up for what will become the foundation for the Sith moving forward and backwards, but in lore, because we had only had some tiny hints to that. I don't even think the Dark Jedi thing had been set up until this. Like the Great Schism, but in the 100-Year Darkness.
No, that's later.
But that comes from here, sort of. Because it's funny because he says like, "Oh, we fought for 100 years," and here it's kind of just like a generic 100 years. But then that becomes gospel, where it's 100-year darkness.
Can't be 200. You have to be 100.
It can't be 101, can't be 99 years. It has to be 100 years on the dot because someone in passing said 100 years of fighting.
Like we fought for 1,000 years, but that's because 985 doesn't sound that epic.
But yeah, it's really Tales of the Jedi has this very cool mixture with its aesthetic.
Oh yeah.
Of medieval stuff and real world kind of cultures. That is definitely a bit Orientalist, but still like very interesting mix with Star Wars tech. And this goes then even farther back with the tech being even more primitive. So you have ships that are being like pulled by people with ropes on the ground, and you have everyone's fighting with swords. There's only a couple of blasters. Most of the blasters are like heavy cannons.
Big beasts like the Mumakil from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it creates this really neat juxtaposition, and it doesn't feel like Star Wars aesthetically, but it does in terms of the theming. It has that mystical sort of element, and especially all the stuff sent at the Sith really earns, I think, that part of it, because they are an empire that comes from, has some of the advanced tech. They have hyperdrive, sort of, but they've been stuck there for so long, and it's built on the basis of this more primitive empire that they've enslaved and everything. And that it's neat seeing the galaxy in its not actual early days, but it justifies itself because you're also seeing the Sith Empire that is so much less technologically advanced. And so even though both aesthetically sort of match in that regard, it feels like a turning point. You get more spaceships and blasters in the later stories. And so this feels like the point when things really do become intergalactic, which even is said in Fall of the Sith Empire. Or no, it is in a Golden Age, where someone says like, well, we've had little struggles, but if the Sith Empire is real and it attacks, we're going to have an actual, I think it's like across the fabric of hyperspace.
Right. I mean, this is. It's not the technical start of the Jedi-Sith conflicts, but it kind of is at the same time. It's a little wonky. It is. I mean, this is certainly. If you like to, on this podcast, we kind of like to be kind of. We don't want to treat Star Wars too real, but at the same time, if you want to like track your real world lineage, everything from the Bane to the Bane War, the World of Bane Within, kind of can track its roots back to here. I mean, I guess can track its roots ultimately back to the big split, obviously. But like this is the one that kind of kicks off Knights of the Old Republic. This war kicks off the Ulacao drama stuff, and then kicks off the Knights of the Old Republic stuff, and then kicks off the Old Republic stuff. So, yeah, you're right. I do love this aesthetic, especially because this is actually supposed to take place even further in the past. It's like this is 5,000 BBY, and the look stuff is like what 4,000,
yeah,
3,000.
I think it's 4,000. I think. Maybe 300 or 3,000 and something, because it's like 30 years before Knights of the Old Republic is when the Tales comics end.
It's something like at least 100 years before something. I'm trying to find by the way, if you're wondering what I'm looking at, like I'm trying to find the image, because there is like a little image of like Naga Sadow or someone talking about the Sith, and they're like, you can see like a little image of like Jedi getting kicked, the Dark Jedi getting kicked out, and head into Korriban, but I can't find it at the time. But yeah, it's interesting. in terms of like how this fits, I do think though there is a little bit of confusion of kind of the Sith species versus Sith lords. They're like, I remember there's like a later issue of like someone saying Naga Sadao was part of like a cult of purebloods, and there's like, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is like it's interesting that everybody is a Sith species. Like we don't see actual like non-Sith Dark Lords, I guess. I mean, I know there's was interbreeding and stuff, but in terms of like, it's like there's the Dark Lord of the Sith, and then there's the Sith people. Kind of a weird.
Yeah, the Sith are like the species that they enslave, and you have the Dark Jedi sort of adjust themselves to that culture. But when we have the flashback that shows them first interacting with them, there's a Sith Lord who's wearing the same helmet as Marco Ragnos, who's like introducing the Dark Jedi to Sith slaves, which it kind of establishes like the Dark Lord of the Sith title, and I guess it's the same ceremonial helmet that they make a big deal out of. Seems to predate the Dark Jedi, so it seems like they kind of adopt the titles of the Sith after they conquer them, but that within that you still have this portion that holds to the fact that they were Jedi once.
Right.
Nagasao keeps talking about how he has Jedi blood.
That's always just, by the way, that's always just one of those weird things that always is always kind of weird about Star Wars, and it's still around to a little bit, not about the blood thing, but more just, are the people treating the Jedi as if they were like a species and not a religion? It's kind of a little weird. It's like, are you a species or a religion?
Force sensitive isn't a thing yet, so it's always Jedi. Jedi kind of just means a person who uses the Force.
That's true.
Back then, because we don't really get a defined idea of what Jedi are. I mean, Tales kind of helps set that up with the Jedi Watchmen and sort of exploring the Jedi Knights and their role in helping people and everything. Mm-hmm. Which even here, they don't talk about like the Jedi Order. They talk about themselves all as Jedi Knights.
Well, I think that's a weird thing about kind of where the prequels come in, where it's like, yeah, I mean, talk about later issues. Yeah, the Jedi are very loose organizations. Like, there are temples and masters, but it's not like they got the big one on Coruscant. And I do think the later lore kind of does a good job of like retroactively making it so like, well, that's how the Jedi evolved. They were kind of decentralized, and then they kind of re-centralized, and then they decentralized a little bit, and then they centralized again. And then
I always look at the Jedi as being like the Doctor in Doctor Who, where you know how there's sort of that theory that is kind of accurate of like the Doctor always regenerates into someone who's better able to deal with the thing that killed him.
Yeah, I think, right.
And the Jedi sort of, every time they collapse, adapt from that. And so the Jedi are decentralized, and they get, their butts kicked because they have, like Voto CS Boss is training like 20 students. And so he knows Exar Kun is
a jerk.
Yeah, is not actually a good Jedi, and he's aware of that, but he has so much other stuff to focus on that he's like, I'll when I come back, I'll talk to you about the whole "you're obviously a Darksider" thing, instead of having one master. And so like the one master, one apprentice thing, lore-wise, comes from that failure, sort of like, no, you have to have one master, one apprentice relationship. They can't be trying to have multiple, because it won't be good enough training, and it can't be all scattered, because every time we do that, one of them goes crazy and kills everyone. So
Luke had that problem in Legends too. It wasn't just Kylo Ren. It's like, no, Legends, he had like a bunch of his students just go crazy. It's like, Dang it, Luke. Get one of them straight.
Yep, and like the prequel Jedi, a lot of their flaws are things that were progressive or like good choices for what had destroyed them previously.
Mhm.
You know, like linking themselves more to the Republic because things had fractured so much during the new Sith Wars, and uh, you know, like the Jedi Lords and everything having to exist because the Order had become distant from the Republic and stuff like that. Like they adapt to whatever problem there is, and they have to keep resurrecting themselves and fixing past problems.
Basically, what we're saying is when it's time for Ray to start her school, get like 3 people, maybe just five tops. Okay, maybe Finn can help you, be your co-teacher, and
She needs
hopefully it won't go crazy.
she needs to start with children students. They cannot do you can't start with teenagers or adults like Luke tried to in both continuities.
Yeah, although those kids did look kind of youngish in some of those flashbacks of Luke. So you think you should probably try a little bit, but I guess not all of them are little hormonal. But yeah, yeah. Start young, Ray. Get some kids. You know, get the parents' signatures. It's
There's
all good.
plenty of orphans.
Yeah, it's true. Plenty of Force orphans. Plenty of Force orphans out there. Um, but no, you're right. I think it is sort of interesting. You're right in the sense, at least in terms of legends, and we don't really know much about canon at the moment. I mean, we have the High Republic for a little bit, and it kind of follows the same path, more or less, of like, yeah, the Jedi have reconstituted themselves after another big Sith war that almost killed everybody. Um, and they're tying themselves more to the Republic. They're a little bit decent in the High Republic stuff. They're a little bit more decentralized. They're kind of a little more loosey with the rules. They have like temples everywhere, and they kind of have this thing where it's kind of like Amish kind of a thing where it's like you can explore the world and then come back and decide, hey, do you want to be a Jedi or not?
What is it, Rumspringa?
Yeah, a little bit of a Rumspringa thing going on, but you're right. But to go back to this book, yeah, I do love the aesthetic. I've always loved that Lord of the Rings look. I love, not to pick on what came afterward with the Old Republic, which I always have enjoyed. And nice to appreciate to some degree. But I always did kind of have that issue of, especially by the time you get to the Old Republic MMO game, where like the Sith Empire's like just the Galactic Empire, but with more Darth Vaders running around.
The Republic has clone trooper armor.
Exactly. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on? I know, like, I mean, that's why I kind of like KOTOR. I mean, the original KOTOR a little bit more. It's like still newish, but familiar, and I think it had a better balance.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me. But yeah, I mean, this stuff, Tale of the Jedi, is like the most unique, with like the swords and the fell beasts, and that Lord of the Ring-ish vibe, which is just so cool.
I will never get over how freaking cool it is that lightsabers have battery packs.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's a tiny thing, but it's so good. Of like, yeah, even lightsabers had to go through some evolution. So farther back, they're needing to use battery packs, and they're much bulkier, which has been kind of carried over into canon. When Afra is like looking at like old lightsabers, and she like realizes, oh wow, this one's super old. When it's that like crystal guy who is evil or whatever, and is that whole arc. That lightsaber is like this, larger than her arm. It's huge and it's bulky and stuff. And she's like, oh, this must be ancient. It's like, yeah, I like the fact that some of the Star Wars tech should sort of change, even though it does raise, obviously in this case, like a bunch of logistical questions about how the heck are ships being pulled by people on ropes. Exactly why they tethering stuff. Why is everything made of like concrete and stone and not steel? But it works because it is consistent with itself in the technology, and it even the more extreme stuff like the ships are still ships. They either look more organic, or the larger vessels look like just sheets of metal plastered around a bunch of pipes.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Sith ones are just jagged and poking out. It looks like they just surrounded an engine, like a bunch of separate engine turbines with some steel. And it's really neat in that sense that it's not advanced, but it's almost like they're struggling with technology that they're not necessarily able to use, which retroactively makes sense because the Verkada and stuff.
Right. It's always interesting ancient past Star Wars. I kind of have this weird thing where I either want to go like the ancient aliens route where the past is more futuristic than the present, or just go the Lord of the Rings route like Tales of the Jedi does. So, it's one of those things where it's like I'm never quite sure what my aesthetic choice of preference is. Although I do love the big freaking war helmet that Marker Ragnos had. It's like, downgrade, Palpatine. Where's your big horny helmet? Why aren't you wearing? Oh, you just got a robe. You got your bathrobe on. I guess you want to be relaxed.
Yeah, that's why Palpatine's great. He doesn't care about being a badass warrior. He's literally in his bathrobe.
Yeah, that's true. You're the most powerful man in the galaxy, and you just did his bathrobe most of the time in the Imperial Palace. But speaking of the Sith, let's go into the Sith themselves. I mean, we talked a little about it. With the whole Sith species and Dark Lords, kind of. But I love how the book eventually gets us to the Sith. We'll talk about the actual Republic characters in a minute, but Sith are the cool part. Let's face it, that's the part we want to talk about because they're cool. I love Korriban. Korriban's like one of my favorite planets in Star Wars. I love I love the Valley of the Dark Lords. It was always cool when you got to play that in Jedi Academy. I love the ancient Egypt look. I know you said the Orientalist. I'm like, yeah. I can see maybe someone saying, yeah, do we have to base the bad guys off of Egypt? But Egypt,
all of the cultures also are sort of based on real world looking stuff. It's neat.
That's true. I mean, I think it's in this book. Like there are moments of like Coruscant that look like ancient Rome. With like the gladiator look. But I love just the tombs and the robes and just it's just cool to see like. It's just I love also just the legend of Marco Ragnos in this story. And I don't know if you saw their episodes, fellow Star Wars podcast pals, probably don't know the show exists, Tapcast Transmissions, Marco Ragnos being semi-responsible for a bunch of the Sith Lords to come after him.
What do you mean they're the only Star Wars podcast?
That's true, they are the only Star Wars podcast. That is an in-joke, folks, if you've watched the podcast. But I love the legend of just Marco Ragnos. I mean, he's kind of the ancient dude of his age. Like for Lord of the Rings fan, he's like the Morgoth of his time. And I always just find like the politics between Leo Kresh and Naga Sadao really interesting, and I love. It's interesting seeing Sith Force Ghost, especially because that was sort of a thing that was later kind of they're not really supposed to exist, but obviously back in like you said, this was an experimental time. So yeah, Jedi can be Force Ghost, bad guys can be Force Ghost too. And I always found that really cool. But yeah. What are your thoughts, Red, on just the portrayal of the Sith? I guess in both comics, especially the early Golden Age stuff.
It's interesting looking back on. So originally, with the original trilogy, we don't hear Sith. The idea was there.
They cut it out of the.
We finally got that deleted scene that we didn't even know exists. With Sith being dropped in A New Hope.
Right. This Sith Lord. I think it's General Tag.
Yeah, I think it's Tag. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of just Dark Jedi. Palpatine's just another Jedi guy because Jedi just means Force user, sort of, is the vibe. And so you have stuff that Lucas clearly intended, and then you also have the actual text, which doesn't make stuff clear, and so people have different assumptions.
And then there's the toys. There's the back of the toys.
Yeah, which give quite a lot of lore, honestly.
Truly 80s franchise.
Yep. And the idea of, okay, the Sith are going to be a species,
Mhm.
which, a little bit before this, Timothy Zahn wanted for the Nogri.
Mhm.
He wanted them to originally be the original Sith species. But here instead, it's interesting how Sith has become such an important part of Star Wars when it is essentially just the species that gets found by the Dark Jedi
Mhm.
and used. And you have Sith purebloods and stuff later on, but it is, but in a roundabout way, it really ends up working why other Sith would take on that title, because it's not really about the Sith Empire itself or the Sith species or culture. In fact, they destroy themselves here, and nearly get the entire species destroyed, and eventually do. The last Pasasi get killed, and even with the Sith purebloods,
Mhm.
that empire clearly falls apart, and there's no more of them really. Uh, and the Lost Tribe of the Sith exists, but they're all humans eventually. But that it all comes back to the banishment. That, like, the reason why later groups and everyone stick to that Sith name isn't because the Sith species or culture, it's because it's sort of the embodiment of the fact that they were banished, that
Well,
they became the Sith.
to quote Darth Kraya from Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith is the belief. It's empire, the true Sith empire, like there in the dark. Which I heard was apparently in with KOTOR 3 was going to happen, going to be a completely different thing than what the Vitiate stuff ended up being. But that's a whole other story. But no, you're right. Sith. I've always found the Sith in terms of like the development of the lore behind it in the universe so fascinating, even more than the Jedi, because well, the Jedi lore did develop for sure. Obviously, what we know about the Jedi today is we know a lot more than we did back in the 80s. I always felt the Jedi had a lot more of a streamlined, kind of clear cut kind of view. I mean, we can talk about people got unsure, like, wow, that's what the Jedi were like during the prequels. Okay, there's a little bit of that, but for the most part, I think the Jedi, like the whole everybody wears Obi-Wan's robe in A New Hope,
Mm-hmm.
but stuff like that. But for the most part, Jedi, they're the heroic defenders of justice and truth, and they're the good guys. But with the Sith, it's like I've always kind of wondered stuff like, did the early '90s EU stuff even consider Palpatine a Sith? Like, I was reading Dark Empire, and I've always wondered, like, is Palpatine just a guy who learned the Force when he got ultimate power politically? Like, no, I'm going to learn ultimate power cosmically. And like he went to the Dark Lords because, like, hey, this ancient cult thing, these guys can help me because they're powerful, but I'm not technically one of them. Vader was, but I'm not. I'm my own thing. I'm my own evil wizard dude who's also the Emperor, so he's kind of above them all. Um, and then kind of watching how the Tales of the Jedi and the prequel stuff kind of want to fuse together, as you say, where it's not really about the Sith species as it is the Sith belief and the idea, which is why something like Darth Bane, the Palpatine, they don't care about Darth Palpatine's not doing this. I'm doing this for my ancient blood relatives on Korriban. He's doing this for the idea of the Sith.
Yeah, the idea of
The dark side.
Yeah, it's there's the Old Republic, the MMO does a lot of good stuff with this.
Mm-hmm.
Like they talk about like Korriban being a Sith lullaby of like for generations, just like the idea of the Sith were supposed to be, or no, it's on Korriban, like the lullaby about like the Jedi betraying them or kicking them out. Like they're fixated, even those who aren't pureblood Sith, on the idea of the dark side should have won. And so everything is about that revenge upon the Jedi for that indignity, even if you're someone like Palpatine who wasn't personally affected whatsoever. It's the Jedi are using the Force for good and letting it be free when it should belong to the worthy, and so they would have if they had won, I would have been one of those worthy, is always the assumption Sith makes. And so like Nagasadao destroys his empire essentially because he wants to get revenge and expand the Sith, because he has this mentality about the birthright of the Sith to, reconquer the galaxy. There is that, guys like a Junta Paul who or the original Jedi who landed there. That hatred is just still lingering there, even when the planet is dead, like we see in KOTOR. That it's just, and even Palpatine seems like angry about it in the Plagueis novel when he talks about it. Like they sort of ingrained this sense of disdain for that loss.
Right. This is actually maybe, I don't know if it's a critique, but just kind of maybe a wish on my behalf. Especially kind of I remember stuff like the Dark Lord stuff from the later comic, where I do wish we had just like maybe a couple, or maybe it's like Little Crash could have been like a non-cis species Dark Lord. I mean, I know the interbreeding stuff makes sense and all that, but I do feel like I've never got, like, especially when you read that comic, if we ever get to that, we should, because it's really good. They don't make Marco Ragnos like, when he appears in his ghost form, like kind of like an alien. He looks kind of human by the looks of it. So, and he's like, you, Ula Kaldroma and Exar Kun, you're going to continue our legacy. You are you are like us brothers who got exiled and kicked out. I just kind of wish that kind of was a bit more prevalent in these comics of kind of like, I get the cis species stuff, but I kind of wish we kind of had a little bit more, especially here, to match up a bit more from what's going to happen later of, you're part of the lineage of the Dark Jedi that got kicked out. It's also interesting, just kind of on a side note, that in Tales of the Jedi, Dark Jedi and Sith Lord get interchanged a lot. There's even a moment in the audio book, and I think it might be in the comic, I don't know, where Exar Kun says, like, we were once Jedi, Ula Kaldroma, but now we're Dark Jedi. But I don't know, did you wish you had a little bit more seeing non-pure blood Sith Lords, just kind of like that kind of idea?
I think here it worked. Well, Ludo Crash is not pure blood. Like, he obviously has Force powers. He's even more kind of in tune with the Force stuff and the tradition than Nagasadao, but he is very much part of the, like, Sith pre-Dark Jedi showing up and sort of maintaining that. Whereas, like Nagasadao at one point says, Ludo Crash must have in his blood like in him the blood of many Sith slaves. Like, almost like being Sith is an indignity. Like, it is something that, if not for this, right, those Dark Jedi would have ruled the galaxy. They wouldn't be on this backwater planet rolling over a bunch of people they consider to be inferior, even though all of them are Sith blooded in some way. Even Nagasadao is, but that's almost, they kind of take that title on almost like as a point of pride of the indignity that they've endured as far as they're concerned. And so I think that works. I do kind of... There are obviously... they say castes, but it's kind of like that there seems to be other species. Like, the Massassi seem more like a different species, or at the very least, subspecies. And I think later stuff expands more on the caste system stuff. So we definitely could have had more, what'd you call it? Like, Sith who aren't of that same, who aren't purebloods and aren't Massassi and aren't Ludo Crash.
Right. I guess maybe my little critique is, I feel like I'm about to say something kind of bad here, but like, I wish Nagasadao wasn't kind of this reddish skin painted thing. Like, I kind of wish, like, I don't know, like, I'm not, kind of like, see right here, kind of red skin, like, like all the Sith kind of have this reddish skin to them.
That's a weird error with the comic. So I guess originally he shows up in a flashback in Dark Lords.
He does.
Of the Sith, and he looks human. And there's a bunch of stuff with that gets retconned, just to, like, his conversation about how he got exiled, and he talks about, like, he's the I think he implies like the Sith Emperor. He's the Emperor, but he's ruled by a Dark Lord or something like that. Um, I think they kind of just rework that into like Ludo Crash sort of being the one who's then in charge of like the Sith part of things, where Naga Sadao is fixated on the Dark Lord or Dark Jedi stuff. Uh, but yeah, later stuff gives him much more human looking skin.
Well, actually, here, see this. He kind of looks more human in this picture than he does even in the comic.
That was my
So,
introduction to him, was that image. And yeah, I always thought it was human until I read the stuff.
oh, see, yeah, see, the way that you explained it, that makes more sense to me, and I guess that's just more of a problem with the art. Not that there's anything wrong with the art per se. The art was, I love the art in this, by the way. This is really good. Um, but yeah, I think that's like my one. I guess if that's like my one issue, it's like I kind of wish he was more human because it kind of makes just everybody look cis, and it's like I don't think that's what was supposed to happen. I mean, I know there was inbreeding, but at the same time, thought the dark. It's the same with Marco Ragnos too, where although that's a little bit of a difference, where like let me see if I can find it. Although this is kind of his ghost, so I'm not gonna critique it that harshly. But let's see if I can find. But like you look at his ghost, like it's very monstery looking. But if you like in the later issue in the Dark Lord stuff, he looks human, so it doesn't matter. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay.
Yeah, I think Marco Rectus's ghost is like his mummified body is why.
Yeah, so he could have looked human looking for all I know. But yeah, I the Sith are just always my favorite part of Star Wars. I'm a dark sider that way. And kind of but we'll get into this later, but certainly be interesting what they do moving forward, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Let's talk about the good guys, Gav and Jory. They're interesting, kind of explorers of the New Republic. I mean, the Old Republic. It's cool seeing the Old Republic. Obviously, a little bit. They're kind of a little like a little entitled. Like they stole their master's ship. I mean, he's a Hutt. Is it he or she? I don't remember.
He's nice though. He doesn't actually that he's the real just victim of all of this.
I know, poor guy. Like he was a nice Hutt, who they
He
were
extended credit.
Gavin Jory just they screw up and they find themselves in the Sith, and Gav kind of becomes Naga Sadao's first apprentice. So Frida Nad shows up centuries later. But what did you make of Gavin Jory and kind of the New Republic side of things of the story?
I really like how it situates things early in the Republic, and that matters. Like they're just planets are still kind of unifying, like we get with the Kuro system, and the Civil Wars and the Unification Wars going on there, and also just the fact that this whole thing kicks off because now that the galaxy is progressing and not an empire. Well, they do refer to the Republic as an empire, the Sith, and it kind of makes sense. It's like, yeah, they are their own empire, sort of spreading, and that means you have like pioneers and adventurers, and so I love the premise of people just mapping out random hyperlanes, just trying to find shortcuts for trade. The Republic sending people out, and that eventually, yeah, you're going to hit something that fights back. It's not just going to be this little threat. It's from the even more ancient times, something they cast out, and that coming back to bite them, and nearly destroys the Republic as a result.
Yeah. It's interesting. I love seeing the old Republic. And I think what's kind of funny, if you want to talk about a little bit more behind the scenes, these were the days when like the Old Republic wasn't like weirdly split into like these two time frames. This was like I think this is, if you kind of want to look back to 19, to when this was written. This was the Old Republic Obi-Wan was talking about when he says, Jedi for the peace and guardians of the Old Republic. Before we kind of have this weird like, you have the Old Republic, Then the Bane stuff happens. Then the Republic kind of reforms itself into the Republic we see in the prequels.
Yeah, that there's like the ancient republic and then the old republic, capital O, capital R in canon, which is the Bane. Yeah, that's or post Bane stuff. Or no,
right.
sorry, Bane destroys the old republic,
Right.
and then you have just the Republic, which is the High Republic and
The prequel.
Clone Wars era. Yeah,
So, which kind of, which kind of was just kind of kept from Legends. But this was back in the day when we thought there's like kind of one Republic. Wait, I mean, I guess the old Republic kind of falls in Legends too. It kind of becomes like a rump state for a little bit.
yeah. I mean, in Legends, it's sort of like they don't feel the need to change the name around. It's not like, oh, this is the old Republic and the new Republic. It's just the Republic. Got to keep saying there's a continuity there, even if there isn't. Just keep saying it.
Yeah, I mean, like we've gone on this podcast before. It's like, does the new Republic as an entity make sense to the name?
Yeah, it's a very weird decision. Calling yourself the new something as a state.
I mean, I mean, like, eventually you're just gonna start calling yourself the Republic. I mean, France doesn't call itself the Fifth Republic every day. Just we're France.
Yeah, in fact, is it even the New Galactic Republic, or is it literally just New Republic?
I think in canon it's just the New Republic. I don't think they're calling themselves the New Galactic Republic. I think it's just...
That's so weird. It's like an individual... That makes it sound like it's just like one planet has a republic. Not like it's a coalition of things. But yeah, Star Wars is always strange with naming.
I know.
For organizations.
I'm going to look it up on Wikipedia just for a second. Just because
it's better than the Marvel Comics thing of the Alliance of... the Alliance... no, what is it? The
Alliance of Free Planets?
It's not even Alliance of Free Planets. It's like Union of Galactic Alliances. It's really bad.
Nope, and according to Wikipedia, it just says the Alliance of Free Planets.
Okay, that's better. Oh, I'm thinking of the later thing when
the Galactic Alliance.
Yeah.
The Galactic Federation of Free. Galactic Federation of Free Alliances.
That hurts. That actually hurts. That is bad naming.
Yeah, like, jeez, I got torn. Matthew, if you're listening to this, I know you don't like New Republic as a name. We could have had it a lot worse. We could have had Galactic Federation of Free Alliances. What does that even mean?
Yeah, because I think Space Doc did a video on bad names for stuff, and they just lost their mind at that of like trying to dissect definitionally what that means. It's just like it doesn't work. It doesn't. What are these words? You're just throwing them.
I know. I don't get it either. But yeah, this is the era of the New Republic. What did you make of like the actual the brother and sister themselves, like as characters, kind of being pioneers and trying to make their fortune and stab their nice boss in the back?
Yeah, they're a bit unlikable. Joy is definitely more likable and has more of a character than Gav. Gav seems kind of dumb at times. Like his shock at the fact that Nagasadao blows up Ludo Crash's ship is really like just have him go along with it. Just have him be like, yeah, this
evil-looking guy is evil. I didn't think that was possible.
But also, it's like, well, as far as he's concerned, Ludo Crash was just shooting at his sister. Like, why is he like, what? But that wasn't ending the transmission. It's like, well, yeah, but you should want to fight him too, honestly, from your perspective. I wish and this is more a thing with the Fall of the Sith Empire stuff. Mm-hmm. I really wish they had done more in the back half to earn him not liking the Republic, because it's a valid point, honestly, that Sadao makes, and there's a lot more you can do with that of of like why would you be loyal to the Republic? But then suddenly, he keeps talking about it as his home, and it's like I wish there was a little bit more of a deal of that, of like them, because it's not that Koros isn't part of the Republic until after their parents get got during the Unification Wars. And so it's like, would they even consider the Republic their home? What does it mean to them? It's like, I think there could have been more exploration of that, and mostly because it tries to sort of parallel the arcs for the Sith and the Republic. Sith are the focus of the first arc, Republic's the focus of the second, sort of. But it doesn't work because you don't get that strong of a dichotomy within the Republic. Like, you get all of this stuff with the Sith of the focus on tradition, and there's the internal politics. It's all really good and interesting. There's different reasons why people are traditionalist, or people who aren't traditionalists seemingly, but don't like Naga Sadow because they think he's reckless. So even his fellow militarists don't like him. Like, there's an interplay there, and there's contradictions. Whereas the Republic, they sort of just crush the people who don't want to join the Republic, who don't want to join for vague reasons, and then they just hop back in at the end. I think there needed to be a sort of debate of the future of the Republic within the Republic, and have that resolve itself more firmly. Not just the rebels are like, we're on your side now, because they kind of try and do that thing of like the first part. Naga Sadow uses the existence of the Republic and the threat of invasion and all these false flag attacks to scare people into unifying.
Right, yeah.
And the Republic unifies because they get invaded.
Right. I think I get what you're saying. And this is something I've heard critiqued about before, was a lot of these Tales of the Jedi comics. I wonder if this is an issue of they're too short, and especially this, because it's sort of a weird prequel sequel where we kind of like, let's just tell the backstory of the saga that we already kind of completed with Uluk and Nomi and all the Exar Kun stuff. Wait, I mean, no, there's sort of an interesting look at it, because it's not like everything needs to be like this grand 20-book thing, which is fine. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, New Jedi Order, it worked, and it's working with High Republic for fans. Like, and High Republic right now just finished up their Phase 2, which is a prequel sequel to the stuff that came before, but that was like a couple of like 5 books total, so you kind of get a little more space to breathe. I wonder do you think that maybe, especially these two, are a little too truncated and short, especially because they're kind of just, I don't want to say they're tacked on, but they're kind of tacked on. It's just kind of an interesting dilemma there.
When I read Fall on its own, I thought that. After reading Golden Age, I don't think it's the size.
Okay.
Because Golden Age manages to have a consistent theme and idea, and then show all the interplay with the Sith politics. I think Fall of the Sith Empire just doesn't utilize the Republic well. I think they just they only attempt for like maybe in a very vague way, and they do kind of play it up of like, hey, these people were fighting against each other, but now we're united. But it's like, well, why does that destroy the Sith but help the Republic? Is it because it's one is a scheme from Naga Sadow, or is it because all of those Sith that are unifying against a common threat are all sort of the most powerful people and only speaking for themselves, whereas the Republic, you have like just individual people with very different goals unifying just for common defense, but like we don't really get the reasoning of why is it different for the Republic? Why is the Republic good? And that doesn't really get justified. It's you don't get a reason why people should, other than, okay, they're under attack. But the Sith think they're under attack too. It's
We needed more moments like this and in Frankens and the cool guy in the Jarhead. I love the Jarhead, by the way. He's
mm,
cool.
Darth
He was,
Simus.
he was cool. Guy in a Jarhead. But no, I agree, and it's sort of interesting that from the other comics as well. And if we ever get to them, we'll get to them. I don't remember the Republic being that involved in much of those comics as well. It was always very Jedi centric.
Yeah, until they show up and kill the Chancellor.
Yeah, it's
They
like
just walk into the Senate.
I mean, don't get me wrong. The Senate looks super dope.
Mm-hmm.
In actually, I just skipped it. The Senate looks super dope in like these old comics. Like, oh, I lost it. Dang
Like
it.
the question, like, how do they hear each other? It's like this is why you have floating chairs.
I know. It's like, do we have to shout really loud? I mean, look at. I think this is supposed to be Coruscant. I don't think this is Tita system. I mean, look at this. Look at this. This is like that's beautiful.
Yeah,
Like
that's Coruscant. Yeah.
that's like this ancient, but like, I mean, like here's a picture of the Senate. If you can kind of see it, like there's someone just sitting on top of a giant stool. Like, does he have a ye old microphone, or is he just shouting really loud? Um, but no, I agree. I do think there is a bit of. I think these stories love the Sith a little too much that they kind of neglect the good guys. And to go back to Gab and Jorah, yeah, they're kind of unlikable. They're kind of annoying kids. They stabbed their boss in the back, and he was such a nice hut. It's like one of the nicer huts.
Yeah, I
Um,
feel bad for him that they're using that. Jory's using his legacy in the end. It's like he hated you.
yeah, that's not very nice. And Gab just like totally falls for Naga Sadow's tricks. I mean, in the end, he does the thing and he stops, saves the day. But yeah, so
The
let's
fighting
talk.
is bloody, but it is kind of weird that Odin is so traumatized, and that other guy, Mehmet, is like I never want to fight again, and it's like I kind of get what they're getting at of like the Republic is sort of expanding and everything, but it has reached a point where it gets met by its match, and even though it wins, it's traumatizing enough that like everyone just wants peace afterwards, and it sort of ends that. But
Mhm.
I don't know, it doesn't exactly get a resolution so much as characters come to the conclusions.
Yeah, I mean that's actually kind of interesting too with what the High Republic's doing with the Nile. It's like how much this 300 years, but how much is this Nile stuff gonna traumatize the High Republic to get to where we are in Phantom Menace? But that's a story for another time. Yeah, but you're right. Like, just kind of thinking of the two issues, the two arcs. It's sort of like Naga Sadao and Ludo Kresh are kind of the two I remember the most, and all the other characters I'm like, I kind of remember you. I remember the nice hut. I remember the brothers and sister, but it's like a little forgettable. Like Naga Sadao is kind of the star of this for sure. Um, Speaking of Sadao, I guess we could talk about the actual war itself, the Great Hyperspace War. This is sort of an interesting one because this is like, again, as we kind of go back to or what we talked about earlier, we kind of were introduced to this particular war less through the actual story and more through the source books and stuff, which is always an interesting way I think to kind of look at Star Wars, where kind of you're introduced to a source book, so you're reading it more like you're reading like an actual history book, which I love those source books by the way, and I
Mm-hmm.
think Canon, especially the newer source books these days, are doing a good job of like kind of creating like a broader history of like here's like what sort of like a Star Wars textbook for history, which I've always really appreciated. Um, but then you actually get to the actual story itself. And I guess I'll throw it to you. It's like, did the war live up to the hype of the actual source books in your head when you were a kid, when you actually read it? Like, how is your thoughts on the actual portrayal of the war itself?
It's kind of funny that it becomes such a big moment in galactic history, given that it is so small, but at the same time, it does like get right to the center of Coruscant. Like, I think its significance is less the scale of the fighting and more the fact that it's the end of like the Republic's real expansion
Hmm.
and infancy. That it kind of has to grow up. been attacked because it's been, pushing further and further out. It's got all these disparate elements that aren't unified enough, and so the Sith attack right into the heart of Coruscant.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though the scale we see isn't that big, it's more the symbolism of it.
Right.
But then again, maybe we just think it's more important than it is because Palpatine has that mural of it, or that carving of it in his office, which in hindsight probably isn't because it is a super important moment for the galaxy, and probably more because he's like, oh, if only we had won.
Ooh. I mean, I think it's sort of. I mean, like look at real world history. It's like a conflict that only lasted a year. It's like, well, that had repercussions 100 years down the line. And this kind of conflict, like, yeah, maybe it only lasted for like less than a year, but it's like, well, that led to the Exar Kun stuff, and that led to the Revan stuff, and then the Great Galactic War, and then the Bane War happens, and then eventually get to the Clone Wars, which is in terms of scale, the Clone Wars is like the big one.
Mm-hmm. It's the thing. It's the fact that hyperspace is being used. Like, Master Oru talks about it. Like, let me see. Like, the Republic has grown and expanded for many generations, encountering no worse than a few interplanetary squabbles and civil wars. But if we should confront the fabled Sith Empire, we will experience a war so great, so devastating, it can cross the fabric of hyperspace, a conflagration spanning the galaxy. And so it is like the fact that hyperspace is being used, that's not like local system stuff or internal stuff, but fighting happening all over the place or in major locations very quickly and suddenly in a very bloody way that makes it different. It sort of changes how war is rather than the specifics of the actual fight.
Yeah, I see that for sure. It's definitely a game changer, for sure. And it is kind of the first big enemy the Republic will ever face. This is sort of where the Republic meets their match in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like you said, it's not like just little local problems, or even maybe more organized pirates that you'd see in High Republic with the Nile. It's a full on army, where it's like, I mean, if the Sith under Naga Sadow were the big enemy of the ancient Republic, then the first big test was obviously the Clone Wars, although that turned out a little differently, unfortunately for the Republic. But
Yeah, and I mean, it's also the first time they fight the Sith, and the Schism, the 100-Year Darkness was more of a Jedi conflict. So it is. In fact, I think in the 100-Year Darkness, I think the Republic mostly stays out of that. So it is sort of the Republic being attacked by the dark side directly. That it's big enough now that it's a target, that it's actually going to be affected by, and is now tied into the light and dark side's struggle.
right, I mean, I guess in some ways this is sort of I mean, the Jedi I mean, I don't know I don't know if Legends ever goes into like why the Jedi picked the Republic as we're gonna side with you guys, as a government organization. But I guess if you want to look at it from a Legends history point, this is when the Jedi and Republic are like, yep, we're gonna be like this. Simpatico. We're buddies, we're pals now. Um, but I do love the actual portrayal of the war itself on the comics. It's just kind of cool seeing like stuff like this. If I can find that other picture of like the invasion of Coruscant with or like this is look at this image. It's like spikes and like fortress sieges.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of cool to see what ancient warfare in Star Wars is, where yeah, it is a lot bloody. It's a lot more gruesome. Like I don't know if I want to show this to get us in trouble, but but the poor Hut guy, he's just getting stabbed by the Sith, like not even blasted, like literally stabbed with a pike. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here's the image again. Here's the invasion of Coruscant. So it's just cool to see like the look and feel. Yeah, it's like this is like the Republic with Rome. This is like one of Rome's first bigger wars outside of like little squabbles in Italy. I guess like what the Carthage War. Want to be historical parallel? Um,
Uh, I mean, there is maybe that invasion that sort of becomes mythologized for Rome. Yeah, you know the one where there's that one guy who holds a bridge.
I wish I remembered. No, just I know the siege of Carthage, but yeah, there's this is sort of. I mean, I guess in some ways this is the big mythological war for the Republic, at least of this time period, because like sometimes when you go to actual mythology and you look it up in the real world, it's like, hey, you weren't that special. But when
Mhm.
you actually tell the tale over and over again, it's like, oh, it's like history kind of makes things bigger out than they actually are. Um, to a certain extent.
Horatius Cocles, who defended uh, the Pons Sublicius, which was the main bridge into Rome from the Etruscan king the 6th century in the war between Rome and Clusium. He and his fellow defenders held the army long enough for the Romans to destroy the bridge behind them, blocking the Etruscan advance and saving the city. Okay, yeah, but like, yeah, the it is, yeah, it is like the first real thing that makes the Republic unified. It seems.
I've always found it interesting, and maybe we'll get into this when we actually get into the comics. That at least the way the comics portray things, these wars seem to go a lot quicker. And maybe that's because they're only just in one story and they're kind of very micro there's like a micro look at them compared to say like the Clone Wars where we kind of get every angle of that war from every person. It's not just this like brief little thing. It does feel like a lot. There's 100 stories going on, where these wars at least kind of have a very, I'm gonna say, linear kind of view on them. If you understand what I'm kind of talking about, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
with like the Clone Wars, it's like, yeah, you can tell Anakin Obi-Wan died with the movies and some of the games, but it's like you can tell just the Mace Windu story from the Clone Wars and what he was doing, or random clone number 100, or Ahsoka, or Quinlan or Dooku, or make up a new separatist character. While these wars do feel kind of like there's only so many characters you can talk about. All the later stuff gets retroactively added to them, like the Dark Reaper for the Great Sith War, from the Clone Wars game, which was a good game, by the way. Oh, by the way, here's an image of Naga Sadao, and see, as you can tell, that's the problem I have with like they made him a Sith species dude. That is not human. Um, even gave him like the Klingon lumps. Um, it's kind of funny, my friend Matt's a Star Trek fan. That this here the Sith kind of feel like the most evil version of Klingons in kind of a weird way.
You see, actually, he is a human. It's just that, like Klingons, they just occasionally get additional facial features that then disappear.
Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, like how do you feel about like how the war actually comes to an end with like Sadao being betrayed and going to Yavin?
I really like that Ludo Crash just keeps coming back
I
and
know.
he gets his big ha, it was a decoy this additional time. Like everyone's been doing decoys, and he does his final thing and he is winning. And then, like I said, I'll just wrecks a ship into him and kills him.
Surprised he
And
didn't
he's
come
just like,
back
I don't,
again.
yeah, it's like, I don't think he was faking that. And it's like, I do love that of just the big, it's a, it's a Starscream moment, you know. He's
Exactly.
making the big deal of, yes, I've betrayed you, and then just getting shot immediately. And it's like, yeah, you know,
Yeah.
you might have been right about some stuff. You might have done your big ploy, but in the end, you're just the bit part. Sucks
Yeah.
to suck.
Sucks to suck. I didn't put this in the notes, but I think this would be an interesting thing to talk about as we kind of talked about the foundationals. Oh no, I did. Um, how do you feel that this story and especially this war, where I don't know, it's like handles the right word. Like, I guess, do you like or dislike some of the, I guess, retcons additions that were made later on? I feel like I do feel like, oh, here's a big one. It's like the one I think I know you don't like. I think is um this doesn't mention that the Jedi go to Korriban and just genocide the people.
Yeah, that was a stupid addition. From the timeline videos are great, but I have no idea why they added that.
Maybe they just wanted to be like extra drama for unnecessary drama for like Vitiate hating
Yeah,
um hating the Jedi. But I
I
guess
mean, they could have done it as just like have them. It's weird because Empress Tata like lets them live. Like she's like surrender your ship. Your men don't have to die.
mhm.
Like, and they even leave the system afterwards. It's if the Republic without the Jedi did that, it would be interesting and be like actually complex. But not really complex, but it would be a dark moment that I could buy. Kind of like what is it? Subterranean. The first Silurian arc in Doctor Who.
Oh yeah.
You know how that? Remember how that ends with like they go. There's the one who's peaceful, and they go into hibernation again while the Doctor is going to work out how to bring about peace. And then as soon as he's turning around and talking about
That's
like,
right.
oh, and then
Yeah, yeah.
the Brigadier just exterminates all of them, and the Doctor just looks disgusted and enraged. Like that is how I think that could have been done.
Right. Keep the Jedi on like the moral high ground while the Republic can do the shady stuff, which I would buy. I would totally buy that. Um Although I guess it is interesting though, because I forget, what do you remember what exactly Tales of the Jedi says why Korriban is pretty much a dead zone by the time you get to the present day stuff? Like, is it just wiped each other out? They just disappeared.
I
It
think it was
makes,
just the Empire collapsed, and they're just all dead at that point.
yeah, that makes sense, I guess. But yeah, I mean, you know, but I guess in terms of, but outside of that, like, how do you feel like the other kind of retcon? I don't know if retcon. I guess retcons, whatever. Additions to like the lore, like Vitiate kind of being the secret Sith who got away, and obviously how this informs the later stuff with Ulick, Revan, Malik, all that good stuff.
It's funny how Naga Sadao getting away isn't in the grand scheme like that. The Masasi just become feral. He dies. Like it doesn't. It's more his ghost. Like he could have died at the end of this,
Mhm.
and as long as his ghost was there, it would have had the same impact on the galaxy, as opposed to Vitiate, whose survival like creates an entire additional, even more powerful empire.
Great civilization. Yeah, it is weird. Like the arc pretty much ends with like Naga Sadao going, I've survived worse, and I will one day return. And he never does. And like I guess his legacy is Friedan Nad, because Friedan Nad is
Mm-hmm.
his apprentice. But even Friedan Nad doesn't, in the grand scheme of things. Well, he does influence Exar Kun, but even then, Exar Kun was always kind of gonna go dark anyway. But Friedan Nad's like only real influence on the galaxy is he took over Onderon as Ghost haunts Onderon, but that's it. He only gets one planet. And Naga Sadao is like, I know in the timeline book they said like his ghost possessed like a Jedi seeker who like infiltrated the temple and he came back for like a few minutes, but then got defeated by like a Jedi who was like secretly Vitiate's spy. Um, who was, because Vichy did not trust those Sith ghosts to help him, which I don't blame him. Don't trust the ancient Sith ghost. Um, but yeah, you're right. It is interesting how this book almost makes it seem like Naga Sadao might be important for the future, and then he kind of never is again. Sirens in the background, don't you like? And that is kind of weird. Sorry about that. I hate this damn the ambulances out there. Um, But yeah, I guess like anything else you want to mention, like how this book places in history,
Uh,
in universe at least,
I mean, we have the setup with Osus, and the temple enclave being set up there, and obviously Odin in uh, his holocron and everything that becomes important later. But yeah, broadly speaking, it is kind of its own thing. Uh, it's not super tied into other stuff. I think
Do you
this
like
is
that? Do you like the fact that this stands alone?
yes, though I think its big weakness is like all of Kevin J. Anderson's stuff, he needed a co-writer.
What do you mean, Tom Veitch? This is Tom Veitch wrote this.
No, Tom Veitch, Kevin J. Anderson wrote on his own the Sith stuff. Tom Veitch wrote the main Tales of the Jedi stuff, and I think
Oh, you're
Kevin
right.
J. Anderson co-wrote some of it.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I'm looking at it right now. Yep. Script by Cameron J. Anderson. Pencil by Chris Gossett. Inks by Stan Woosh. Color by Pamela Rambo. And letters by Sean Conot. Sorry if I pronounced anybody's names wrong. Um. Oh, you're right. You're right. That's interesting. I didn't actually know that this was a Kevin J. Anderson original.
Yeah, and Kevin J. Anderson can be really fun. Well, I mean, I think this is his best individual work, but
Mhm.
he definitely needs co-writers, like with the Young Jedi Knight stuff
Mhm.
and the other stuff in Tales of the Jedi that he does with Veitch as a co-writer.
Right. I mean, according to at least the first arc, Tom Veitch wrote just the first part alone. Do
Mhm.
you do you think it would have been different if Tom Veitch had written this backstory because he did so much of the rest of it, or
Yeah, I think
maybe?
Kevin J. Anderson is great with ideas, but Veitch is just a stronger character guy. Like Tales of the Jedi, the plot is a little all over the place,
Mhm.
and like the Ulick's stupid plan to infiltrate that cult and everything like doesn't really work.
It's the
But
first episode.
Veitch plays the drama and like very Shakespearean elements of Star Wars up so well.
Mhm.
And stuff like the conflict with between Kay and Ulick and that their fight, like there's more emotion in that than I think that could have been useful here.
Yeah, you're right. Like I'm just thinking about the next stuff. And I feel like the characters in the future stuff are a lot more. They stand out to me at least. Like I remember XR, Ulick. Nobody kind of gets a little sidelined by the end. I kind of
Mm-hmm.
forget about her. But I remember Master Voto.
There's the Twi'lek guy whose name I always forget, but is a great character. You think he's a bit part, but he's always there. There's the Cathar Jedi who doesn't forgive Ulick and is angry at him.
There's King Omen.
Mm-hmm.
That other brother sister duo who are evil. Um, So yeah, I agree with that. I have a very I don't want to say love hate, but like I have a very like I'm probably more sympathetic, especially after kind of learning about Kevin J. Anderson a lot more because did such a good job. Like he was sort of the reason why books and comics kind of tied in a lot more together
Mm-hmm.
when they almost didn't. It's like that would have been the tragic to kind of the whole idea of cohesive universe. And I've always been a Veitch fan. I like Dark Empire, and I've always liked this side of, and this is why I love Tales of Jedi. I've always liked this side of Star Wars a lot more. I've always been more into the fantasy element. I guess that's another thing I guess I can mention here about this book that I guess we didn't talk about too much in depth. What did you think of like the portrayal of the Force? Do you like the portrayal of the Force in these books, with like they're more magic-y, or do you prefer a little bit more of a subtler approach? Like, what's your vibe on like the kind of usage of the Force and the powers and whatnot?
I think because of how like elevated
Mm-hmm.
things are in this story, it works.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like it definitely wouldn't be something that I'd want in like KOTOR, which very much sticks with the prequels in terms of how the Force operates. And there isn't really the like nature of the light side and dark side isn't super explored in this stuff. At least not here. The Sith kind of are just
evil within.
Yeah, and they don't really like use the Force differently or have like a different mentality towards. They don't worship the Force necessarily in the same way that like we get with later Sith and with the other Dark Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you kind of get that with like Ulick's story, where it is very much what Yoda said about like the quick path, the easy path. That's not really even about power so much as getting things done more efficiently and feeling the need to be strong enough because he couldn't save. What's his master's name?
Who's master again? Sorry,
Arca-Jeff.
Arca-Jeff. That's right. Ooh, it's master. Yeah, I agree. I mean, don't get me wrong. I adore Tales of the Jedi. I mean, I love this era, but I do feel like there's a little bit of this, and also like kind of Tim Zahn's work as well. I mean, I'm not sure about all the '90s era books because I haven't read all of them because they're hard to find, for one thing. But I do feel like kind of that philosophical Star Wars core kind of gets missing in certain areas, especially where it's like, in Tim Zahn's case, the Force just kind of feels a little bit more. Here's a tool, you can use it.
Yeah, it's more like ESP for Zahn because it's more sci-fi oriented. It's kind of like stuff in Dune with the psychic elements. And for guys like Kevin J. Anderson, it's more like magic.
Right.
Instead of the more spiritual kind of idea, which is what you start to get when, like, that changes once, like Lucino starts to really tighten what the Force is when he takes over an NJO. And, from there, you get a lot of greater emphasis on much and dark. And then, of course, having the prequels and Lucas really spelling that out helps a great deal.
Right. Although, I think if you want some good dark light, Empire Strikes Back and all that stuff it's all there. But I do agree, yeah. I guess we can talk about kind of kind of the final thing of like what to put back in the canon. What I mean by that is sort of like, not only just because. Oh, well, so I'll mention what I kind of mean by that in kind of two senses of the word. In terms of like the ancient past stuff, I kind of follow the mentality of until something gets actively contradicted, I can see a lot of the stuff still kind of fitting into the main canon. It's like, like they mention stuff of like, Jedi and Sith, we fought a bunch of wars, killed each other a couple times, almost had mass extinction, but we always bounce back. We always bounce back. I guess in sort of like what kind of keep and what to kind of influence, like I actually do like the magic element. Like one of I think we talked about this off screen several times, but like I love it when Palpatine's just an evil wizard and he's like a guy's cauldron, like in World Between Worlds and that Clone Wars arc. That's always just fun. Is there anything that you would like to see when they hopefully one day kind of touch upon this era of Star Wars again? What would you like to see kind of modernize? What I mean by modernize, like take these ideas, but kind of in a more fleshed out way. Now that we have the prequels and the originals and sequels, and kind of a more, I mean, I'm not in terms of like be less experimental, but kind of like smoothing out the rougher edges of like this was like attempt one of trying to show what the ancient times were like. What would sort of like you want to see if we ever went back and kind of told these stories again, or just updated them, kind of a situation, if you kind of get my drift?
I mean, I would definitely like to see the Great Hyperspace War brought back. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Korriban. I mean, I still refuse to call it Morriban.
They fixed that. That's Korriban.
They did, thankfully, but it's so silly. But I do wonder how like the Great Hyperspace War doesn't need to be set when it was originally. It could be the same conflict as what we see as like the bits of the canon version of Malachor.
I'll just warn you, there are mentions of the Great Hyperspace War, but they come from like those D&D source books, and I do not trust those.
Yeah, I was just looking up like Uliquildroma stuff gets mentioned in one of the source book things and stuff, and it's like, that they're just gonna overwrite that stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree. It'd be kind of interesting because, like, I'll be honest, as of now, nothing really. It's like it all could still kind of fit. It's like they
Hmm.
always get the broad strokes of like we get the 100 Region of Jedi and the Sith split. They mentioned the 100 Years Darkness in like an early Star Wars comic,
Yeah,
and then
that's
Jedi
been
and Sith.
referenced a few times. That's from the Jason Aaron stuff, and yeah, that seems to be sticking, which makes sense.
And then there are a bunch of Jedi Sith wars. And then the Bane thing happens. It's a little different. And then we're kind of here. But yeah, I agree. You know, would you want to see kind of the continue, like, and I guess we kind of see it in kind of like, again, with Clone Wars and Rebels, that kind of magicalness of the Force. Maybe not go to the extreme, but like, do you like seeing that in general? And would you want to keep some element of it? Like Sith sorcery or even just magic?
Yeah, I do like it. I think drawing something of a divide between like dark side's magic stuff and the Night Sister magic would be neat. Or showing them as like different disciplines, which
Right.
we're gonna get probably more cleared up on that.
Hmm.
Uh, I definitely want more of an answer on how the Night Sisters relate to the dark side, because it seems pretty dark sidey. It doesn't seem like they're tapping into like the natural, that it's just like chaotic natural stuff. It does seem pretty evil.
It gets a little weird with Marin too, because she's kind of now tapping into something else.
Well, isn't she like starting to lose a lot of her ability to like do magic?
I mean, just in Survivor, she still kind of uses. She talks. She's like, there's a moment where she talks about like the flame. I can't explain it. It's a
Yeah,
little.
I know in the book it's like it's harder for like she's falling to the light side almost.
Yeah. So because she got friends and family and good social network.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've seen any like cutscenes for Jedi Survivor.
None of the Marin stuff.
She kind of goes a little into it because she still kind of uses that magicy stuff,
Hmm.
but it's not a like she does can summon green fire, but it's like she kind of talking about it in a different way now. Like the flame burns differently than like the rage of it
Right.
all. I guess in terms of the Sith, what's interesting is, I mean, obviously they never gone. They've I know there's like an image of like what looks like a Sith species in the art, but I don't trust that in terms of like a confirmation. I just think that's just something someone wrote that's cool.
Yeah.
Um, do you? I'll just ask you that front. Do you want them to keep the Sith species element, or because I mean, because ultimately they kept ultimately the important part, which I think people maybe overlook the Sith species stuff, which that's not important. What's important is still what they did keep, which is Jedi dark side split. Jedi kicks you out. You're out of the group, and then we end up on Korriban, and we build our empire. And I guess in this case, the empire kind of just continues on and on and on until the Bane stuff. But do you want them to keep the species element, or do you think that might be a little too 90s sci-fi? We might want to redo something else. Like, what are your thoughts? I've always been curious.
I mean, the question I guess is, hmm. I mean, what is Exegol?
It's like a Jedi. It's like a Sith throne room. It's like kind of the one of the bigger dark side. I guess it's like. I guess if I had to kind of come up with an idea, it seems like Canon Ziost, where it's like
Hmm.
that's the throne room, but that's not the home world. Like like Korriban is the home world, but Ziost was the throne room, the throne world.
Okay.
That's what kind of lore's gone into that a little bit. Let me look it up. Uh,
Because
Re-
yeah, because they play up all the thing to like the entirety of this. I mean, there's also the whole thing with the how the role of two is in episode 9, where it's what like each Sith is part of the next one in like a literal sense.
it's a little bit. They kind of retconned that a little bit. It's just
It's just Palpatine being flowery with his language.
he loves, yeah.
Okay. Uh, then
Palpatine's
yeah.
not Plagueis, I promise you. He's not Plagueis in a body. He's not the same person for thousands of years. Palpatine's still
Uh,
Palpatine.
but yeah, I kind of would be okay with them bringing them back, but I don't necessarily need it. I think if they focus more on the exiled part without, because the Sith pureblood stuff almost feels like an intermission in the long saga of the Jedi and Sith. Like it's a part. It's the where they get the name and stuff, but it's not. It's a detour in the original sin, essentially, that Palpatine is getting revenge for.
Right.
That once more the Sith will rule the galaxy. Like that whole point that they keep going back to. There being a species isn't necessarily necessary to that. I mean, they could even have it still be a thing, but it's just a species they enslave.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting that in the old Legends EU stuff, a lot of the Mandalorians are based off of an alien species. The Sith are kind of not really. Jedi aren't. But no, I agree. I mean, that's sort of it's always with a choice that kind of part of the Sith Empire took. That kind of form it took, where it's like it starts out as the exiles, then we kind of get the Sith species version of the Empire. Then it kind of goes back to the exile version with Ulik and Exar, and then
Yeah.
Revan and Mal, and then kind of we go back to the pure the blood cis with Vitiate,
Mm-hmm.
and then we kind of go back again to the exile version
Yeah.
of
The new Sith Wars.
so and then today. So like, yeah, I'm not opposed to it either, but I do kind of like to focus like kind of let's just kind of keep the focus on the fact that that they're exiles. That's the whole point. They're exiles and they built an empire of some sort.
Yeah. I mean, if they're gonna go and well, do we even know how many times the Sith come back, or if it's more like one or two big hurrahs?
In canon, it's so vague. It's which probably because they don't have it in canon. It's very much seems like one or two big hurrahs. It honestly feels more like, according to the newer stuff, at least what I've read, kind of like the exile, and then kind of just this weird prolonged Jedi Sith War that still is in this old Republic timeline of 5,000 BBY to 1,000 BBY. I mean, they don't have any details on it. Then the 1,000 BBY war happens, and then this take Coruscant, and I guess that's when they rule the galaxy. And then the
Right.
Jedi kick their butts, and then I don't know how Darth. I mean, I don't know what form it took, but obviously Bane survives, and then Rule of Two, and then that's then what we know from the saga stuff. So it doesn't seem like in Legends where it's like the Sith Empire is here, then they get destroyed, and then the Sith Empire comes back, and then they got destroyed, and then the Sith Empire comes back, and they get destroyed. Um, it does seem like there's a bit more of a continuity, but again, it's so vague. I couldn't tell you. Um,
Yeah.
would you want to see like a more singular continuity, or do you not mind like the constant cycles? I know friend of the podcast who doesn't know who's probably not listening, Eckhart Slaughters like brought up the whole too many Sith wars, like kind of Sith get destroyed, Sith come back, Sith get destroyed, Sith come back.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with the constant coming back. I think it should have been less. There should have been fewer Sith Empires, though.
Right.
Like
Agree.
more. I kind of liked how the new Sith Wars was. While it was 1,000 years of conflict, which is way too long. That it was like much. It was portrayed much more as like a scattered thing. Like the Sith were marauders for most of it, and pirates. Which I think works. Them just causing a bunch of destruction.
Yeah, that's another thing I've always been curious about when we get to this point is what does the Sith Empire look like? Because that's something we don't know in canon. It's like There's a Sith Empire. We have remnants of that empire with like the Exegol Tomb, Korriban, Malachor. So we have there are remnants of that empire. Palpatine's looking back to that empire for inspiration, obviously for stuff. But is the Sith Empire? Though I mean, what's always sort of funny is they always act like the Sith Empire is like the singular entity that didn't have. Well, in Legends, we also know the Sith Empire is multiple factions. There's the one in this comic, Uluk's Empire, Exar Kun's Empire, Revan's Empire, Vitia's Empire, Bane's Empire, well, the Brotherhood of Darkness. Um, so yeah, like what does the Sith Empire is it like a singular state with an emperor, or is it kind of like you say, kind of more? Is the Sith Empire throughout this like 5,000 year history going to be more like what it was in New Sith Wars, where it's kind of marauders and they're a Sith Empire because they're all Sith, but they're kind of all doing their own thing. And I do kind of wonder if like that's maybe how you do it, where it's like the war is kind of more like the Sith are always around, but they're not always like a threat. Like sometimes, like you'll have like little Sith kingdoms here and there, but like they never get together and then kind of go for it until like the 1,000 BBY stuff where they like all got together and they went for it.
Right, like the Jedi keep thinking they've destroyed like 100 different brotherhoods of darkness leading up to a Sith Empire that forms. Kind of thing where like they keep thinking these little enclaves of Sith are just different Jedi who turned to the dark side over the years, calling themselves Sith, and that sort of eventually building up to a successful enough empire, or successful enough fight. Because I am fine with there not being a continuity between too many, or I like how Legends handled the continuity between a lot of the Sith, where much as I like Vitiate as a character, I do kind of dislike the direct, literal Sith Empire literally formed from pureblood Sith that survived. I kind of
Yeah,
like the Revan making himself a Darth, on his own, and Ulick falling because of a ghost who was also trained by a Sith's ghost, kind of thing.
yeah, I agree. It kind of there's kind of this. I never like. Yeah, I kind of like there's a Revan's empire is just a proxy for like a bigger empire that's keeping
Yeah.
secret. Instead of kind of, I actually did prefer. I think it does. My problem does come more with the MMO game, where it's like a continuous, where it's like there's been the secret empire manipulating things the whole time instead of just sometimes Jedi fall the dark side and they form his empires. It
Mhm.
happens. It
Yeah,
happens.
it's like the Empire isn't eternal. Uh, Not the Eternal Empire, different Eternal Empire, but like the Empire, the Sith Empire isn't eternal, but like the Sith's hatred is, and the hatred of like the scorned Jedi, and so that lives on. That keeps popping up. That manifests in people like Palpatine over and over again.
Yeah, and I don't need even in canon for this empire to be like this state. Like, I don't need it to be like the Great Galactic War Empire. It's like it just the Galactic Empire with more Darth Vaders. Um, I kind of always like the idea of the Sith Empire almost being like there's a kind of a weird parallel for history buffs out there, like the dark version of the Holy Roman Empire in some ways, where it's like different Sith lords existed simultaneously, and they built like little mini kingdoms. They kind of do quasi work together because, like, hey, you're a Sith, I'm a Sith. We believe in the same religion, but ultimately we're still gonna stab each other in the back because that's what we do. Um, and then a couple times they'll get together, and then eventually, like the Holy Roman Empire, will just collapse
Yeah,
because they
I can
get
also
crushed.
see them taking advantage of existing stuff, kind of like how in the Darth Bane trilogy we have like Sith troopers, but they're all kind of just people who are disaffected with the Republic, living in the Outer Rim, that like have no actual loyalty or connection to the dark side or to the Brotherhood of Darkness itself.
Yeah, that'd be interesting too. We've gotten so little of what the ancient Sith were. We get a few things in like the Afro comics of like they dealt with like they didn't like another dark side cult that was trying to use like technology, and so you see like the Siths and like they got the dark road, but that's it. The book Shadow of the Sith had a very Tales of the Jedi like Sith Lord, Force Ghost, and a talisman called Viceroy Exim Panchar, who was a Sith, but he kind of ruled over like one planet. He's like a Friedan Nad type, it's like he was around, but he like kind of ruled over one planet, like kind of evilly. Um,
Yeah.
so
I like
yeah.
those little spin-off Darth and Dedu
Mhm.
guys. Whereas like the Sith Empire can be like I kind of like the idea of the warlords, but I also really think the core should always be fallen Jedi who want revenge. It's why Crate and his new Sith Empire works for me so well, because it's all built up from a Jedi who we know who is just angry and wants revenge and builds sort of in the background. And he, to get his muscle, he has to take over the existing empire that Palpatine built, its remnants. It's all kind of around this nucleus of just one fallen Jedi.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I mean, they have kept that, so I'm sure they'll go with it. And so whenever we recover, like, yeah, I do wonder if like we'll have they can be spin-off Sith, but like I guess the Habsburgs of the Sith, if like the Austrians were the biggest of the Holy Roman Empire, are still the lineage, be it blood or I hope more training, like master apprentice lineage of this core of dark Jedi who got mad. Like they are still like the top Sith. They're like the evil Sith Council or Sith Emperor. I know there's like a Sith Emperor technically, but I think that's from a D&D book. But yeah, those are like sort of things I would like to see come back. Um, I will say I do think a lot of new canon stuff does take more influence from Tales of the Jedi, like just aesthetically. Like it's not full on spikes and spears, but there's certainly a bit more of that brick and stone temple look, which I appreciate. Um, you know, Obviously we haven't seen what a Sith Empire looks like, but I just hope it's not Galactic Empire, but with North Darth Vader's. And I don't know if you noticed that or not. It's like I think Resistance even had like Naga Sadow's image in one of its Sith temples, which was cool. Um, so yeah, that's another thing. I think have you noticed that? Is that just me being
The aesthetic, it's definitely there in the Afro comics, for sure.
yeah. Um, but we've gone on for 2 hours. I think that's been good.
Yep.
So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Red, for joining me to talk about one of my favorite Legends comics, Tales of the Jedi. I hope we can do the rest of these because these are really good. These are a lot of fun. Um, if you can't find the omnibus because these are expensive, you can always find these. Well, where would you find yours? Like where can you find these?
You might be able to find these individual trade paperbacks decently cheap on eBay. Otherwise, Comixology has all of them on Amazon for digital. Or try your luck at your local comic book store, dig through the back issues.
Yep, always try your local comic book store. But again, thank you for joining us. Comment below. Let us know what you thought of this week's episode. Um, get the brand, get the banners. Of course, as always, you can follow us at Ion Cannon Pod. You can follow us at Ion Cannon Pod. Follow me at JID 2021. Look forward to next week. Matthew will return. We'll have a big discussion about New York Comic Con. Check out the videos though from this week. He's posted a bunch with our friend Star Raptor. Chris Abbott. So yeah. So this was a lot of fun, everyone. And of course, check the Star Wars Underworld Discord. Sign up there for lots of fun discussion. Thank you again, Red, for joining us. Twice in a row in terms of the shows. So thank you again. And until next time, everyone, let's blow this thing and head home.